Malole, my name is Emily Christensen, or Emily Hollow, as I'm also known as. And something that I've struggled with my entire life, or that I've dealt with my entire life, is double consciousness. For one of my communications class at BYU, we were asked to do a final project on a concept or theory within the communications realm, and I chose to talk about double consciousness.
So, what is double consciousness? In 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois first coined the term double consciousness in his book, The Souls of Black Folk. To give him some validation, Du Bois was an American socialist, historian, author, editor, and activist. He also aided in the creation of the NAACP, or National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Du Bois had originally used the term double consciousness in relation to people of African descent who were now living in North America. He wrote that this term was more of a feeling or a sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of his or her two-ness, an American, a Negro, two unreconciled strivings. However, his view, or the view that he perceived American to be, dealt more with mentally identifying as or being influenced by white people and European culture. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states that double consciousness is a social philosophy concept to describe an inward two-ness. Again, originally associated with African Americans due to the devaluation within a white-dominated society. So in other words, double consciousness refers to the idea of having a double self.
We each can have multiple double selves or multiple different versions of double consciousness. But for me, the main one is the fight between my Palangi, or my white American side, coming from my mom's heritage, and then my Tongan culture from my dad's side of the family.
It is simply human nature to search for belonging in one's own identity. But here we have a quote from the movie What a Girl Wants, saying, "Why are we trying so hard to fit in when you were born to stand out?" The idea of self-concept refers to the way that a person thinks about themselves. Self-perception refers to the way that a person perceives themselves. But these terms and ideas can become different or can change based on the opinions and thoughts of others. This comes into play a lot with the social comparison theory. This other theory refers to the comparison of oneself to another. We all know the phrase, comparison is the thief of joy. Bringing comparisons into our lives creates negative views of oneself more than they bring positive views. Also referred to as having a divided self, double consciousness creates the feeling of being divided. This causes an internal conflict within individuals in relation to one's identities, based on the tensions or differences between differing cultures or ideas. A study in the Journal of Pan-African Studies wanted to measure the difference in racial identity conflict. This study concluded that those who identified with one race or ethnicity experienced less identity conflict. There was a better connection or understanding of their culture, which created a greater sense of self and identity. Now, let's look at double consciousness in terms of today's pop culture. The idea of double consciousness is very present in the superhero realm. Several, but not all, superheroes tend to hide their identity. Take Batman and Superman, for example. I know these are DC examples, and I will further go into more Marvel examples, as you can tell, so please don't judge. But these superheroes ultimately live two very different lives, one as a regular human being and the other as a superhero that saves lives. So let's look at the Black Panther. The JSTOR Daily talks about this topic. We have first cousins T'Challa and Eric Stevens, or Killmonger, each wanting to claim the throne for the Kingdom of Wakanda. T'Challa is African-born and from the culturally rich and technologically advanced Kingdom of Wakanda. Eric, or Killmonger, who is portrayed as the villain, is American-born and an orphan from the slums of Oakland. These two characters portray the two distinct sides of Du Bois' theory of double consciousness, fighting for their ability to be seen. But looking individually at Killmonger, or Eric Stevens, he is also a very big example of double consciousness himself. He is Wakandan, but he's also born in America, and the people of Wakanda shun him or don't respect him because of that difference there. An article written by the African American Intellectual History Society also talks about double consciousness within Black Panther, but in a different way. You see, the character Black Panther was originally developed by white creators with white views of what a black superhero should be or look like. In this article, they say that creating an African superhero from a country untouched by European imperialism, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby began a dialogue about the implications of Black agency throughout the African diaspora. Anxiety linked to domestic racism and desire linked to the African diaspora places like Black Panther in a contested space where questions about freedom, legitimacy, and equity are put on display. Take the 1970s comics, for example. Black Panther created a shift from the typical jungle action comics, which were primarily covered in or primarily involved white blonde characters. The Black Panther gave light to a black character hero. There's also involvement within the KKK in the comics themselves, in which T'Challa challenged them. The article talks about how progressive whites love criticizing overt racism, especially when it diverts attention from its abiding institutional variety. Then Jack Kirby came into play again in 1977 and 1979 to edit Black Panther's image. However, it was Kirby's style, but much less engaged with African American life, leading some to explain the title's decline with that exit. In the 1990s, Christopher Priest aimed to create a more intentionally Afrocentric version of the character. Later in 2002, Priest said, "The Black Panther has never been a marquee character. The character is black. Most people want to read comics or see movies or listen to music they can immediately identify with. And I'm guessing a great majority of people who have never even tried Panther have an instinctive notion that they will not be able to identify with the character. But people universally identify with Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson or Muhammad Ali. The issue of race is handled in Panther in a way no other comic series currently published can handle it. Sadly, because, to my knowledge, I am the only African American writer currently working on a mainstream superhero monthly series." Next, we can look into the movie Get Out and double consciousness that is used in that. To preface, this is a movie that involves an interracial couple of a black man and a white woman. Rose, the woman, invites her boyfriend Chris home to meet her family, the Armitages, for the weekend. Spoiler alert, but the Armitages invite Chris to their home in order to kidnap him, steal his body, in which they can then use to turn into their own vessel in order to preserve the brain of one of the older white family members. In an article in Philosophers in America, they examined this movie with double consciousness. One very big aspect of double consciousness is also seeing oneself through the eyes of others. This can be seen a lot towards the beginning of this movie. Chris, the main character, seems to see himself how others see him, showing a bit of a lack of true self-consciousness. Because of this, him entering a home of a very white and racist family fights with his two identities. There's also a point in the movie where Chris asks Rose if her family knew that he was black. This puts into play Chris's actions of trying to see himself and define himself through double consciousness, while also trying to see himself through the eyes of Rose and her family at the same time. Dubois states that black bodies are valued only in terms of how white gazes value them. In Get Out, while amidst a family's friends and other family, there are several comments made in regard to Chris's body and his appearance, as you can see in this picture. When asked why they were choosing black people after they had kidnapped Chris and tied him down and started to manipulate him, Hudson, the father, states, "What I want is deeper. I want your eye, man. I want those things you see through." An article in JSTOR Daily also talks about this, as it is a stereotype for black men to be stronger and more desirable. And going back to how we can apply double consciousness individually, for me, double consciousness would involve cultural differences between my white heritage and the American influences that it holds, as well as my Tongan culture and the Tongan cultural heritage that I have as well. Aspects such as values, traditions, and other cultural beliefs. For example, within the white and American culture, we are a bit more aware and respectful of social space. We will keep our distance unless we feel it is appropriate or acceptable in that setting to do otherwise. Such as for greetings, it may be more customary to offer a handshake or a simple smile and head nod, respecting the personal space of the other person. However, it's very common in the Polynesian culture to be a lot closer. It's very customary to hug or to do a side a side cheek kiss, which is called a filwaki.
Within the Polynesian community, I'm what's known as an Afakasi Tongan, meaning I'm half Tongan and I'm half another race. And in my case, I'm half white. That doesn't mean that I don't love being Afakasi or that I'm not less of either one of those cultures or those races.
Instead, one might sometimes look at it from the standpoint of living two lives, a bit of a Hannah Montana moment.
Instead, it feels like I'm able to learn something new about myself because of the complexity of my identity and who I am.
But this doesn't just have to deal with one's race or cultural identity. As I've talked about throughout this video, everyone has a bit of a split personality or identity, or simply multiple sides of who they are. So now it's your turn. What's something that divides your identity?